The laughter in the restaurant was loud, but not loud enough to cover the sound of the pregnancy test hitting the floor. He had just called her a desperate burden in front of a dozen people, smiling as her face shattered. What he did not see was the man watching from the corner table, the one with the tailored suit and the quiet eyes, who had just folded his napkin once, very precisely. His new wife was being humiliated, and in his world, that required a very specific answer. Her name was Elena. 2 years ago she left him, believing his cruelty was the worst the world could offer. She was wrong. The man now rising from the corner table was Kenji Tanaka, and his quiet precision was a language all its own. This public shamming wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war in a world where debts are settled not with words, but with absolute consequences. To understand the depth of the insult, you have to understand the quiet hell Elena had just escaped. Her ex, Mark, wasn't just cruel, he was a master of calculated degradation. Their relationship began like a fairy tale, but quickly became a case study in coercive control. He isolated her from friends, criticized her family, and monitored her spending. When she became pregnant 2 years ago, his control mutated into disgust. He called the pregnancy a trap, accused her of deceit, and told her she was unfit to be a mother. The final blow came when he presented her with an ultimatum: terminate the pregnancy or be left with nothing. She chose nothing. She left with a suitcase and a positive test, a statistic in the 24.8% of pregnant women who face severe harassment. Elena rebuilt her life from absolute zero. She took a job as a translator for a small import firm in Tokyo, working late into the night with her infant son, Leo, sleeping in a carrier on her back. It was there, at a corporate meeting that ran past midnight, that she first encountered Kenji Tanaka. He was not the client. He was a silent observer from the lending bank, ensuring a debt was repaid. He noticed her not for her tired eyes, but for her precision. She corrected a critical contractual error in real time, a mistake that would have cost the firm millions. After the meeting, as she packed Leo's diaper bag, Kenji approached. He didn't offer praise. He asked a single question about the clause she'd corrected. Their conversation lasted 3 minutes. He left without another word. A week later, a formal job offer arrived at her apartment, a position with a salary triple her own at a reputable logistics company. There was no signature, only a business card embossed with a subtle chrysanthemum pattern. This was Kenji's world, not the Hollywood caricature of tattooed thugs and street violence, but the modern reality of the Yakuza. By 2024, their numbers had dwindled to a record low of just 18,800 members, but their influence had evolved. They were financiers, shadow shareholders, and arbiters of complex business disputes. Violence was a last resort, a costly and messy tool replaced by psychological pressure, strategic bankruptcy, and the unshakable threat of social and professional annihilation. Kenji was a Shate, a younger brother in a clan that specialized in resolving inconveniences for major corporations. His power was not in a gun, but in a ledger. His reputation was his currency, a man of exacting, silent efficiency who always balanced the books. Their courtship was a parallel negotiation. He was direct. He provided stability, security, a name that commanded fearful respect. She provided an anchor to a normal world, a brilliance he recognized, and a love for his stepson that was immediate and absolute. He married her not with a grand gesture, but by quietly adding her and Leo to the intricate, protected network of his clan's dependents. For Elena, it was salvation. For Mark, who had heard whispers of her remarriage through old friends, it was a joke. A desperate woman marrying some foreign businessman. The idea that she had connected herself to real power never crossed his mind. Which is why, when he saw her 8 months pregnant with Kenji's child, sitting alone at a cafe in Roppongi, he saw an opportunity, not for reconciliation, but for a final public victory. He approached with his new girlfriend and 2 colleagues in tow. He began politely asking about her life. Then, his voice rising for the audience, he recounted their past, painting her as unstable, gold-digging, and manipulative. He pointed to her pregnancy. "See," he laughed. Always using a baby as a tool, some things never change. The climax was the dropped pregnancy test, a prop he'd brought, clattering at her feet. The entire restaurant froze. Elena's face, a mask of shattered dignity, was the trophy he wanted. He never scanned the room. He missed the lone man in the corner who had not frozen, but had gone perfectly still. Kenji had been waiting for her to finish a meeting. He saw everything. In the hierarchy of insults, this was not just personal, it was a profound breach of protocol. To openly shame a Yakuza wife was to disrespect the entire clan's authority. It was a debt incurred, and in Kenji's world, all debts are collected. He did confront Mark. He stood, placed payment on his table, and guided Alina out, his hand a steady pressure on her back. In the car, he said only two things. First, to Alina, "You will never see him again." Then into his phone, in a dialect even Alina didn't fully understand. "The foreigner at La Belle Epoque, I need his ledger, every page." The retaliation began not with a threat, but with a silence. The next morning, Mark's firm found their main line of credit from a Tokyo-based investment fund inexplicably frozen. Calls were not returned, emails bounced. By afternoon, his biggest client, a manufacturing giant, cancelled a pending contract, citing reputational due diligence concerns. Mark blamed technical glitches, market nerves. He was a bully, but not a fool. A cold suspicion began to form. He called a contact in the expat finance circle, asking about Japanese business culture, about warnings. The man, after a long pause, said, "Did you piss off someone with real estate in Kabukicho? Just apologize, quickly." Instead, Mark's pride hardened into recklessness. He tracked down Alina's old phone number and sent a torrent of messages, escalating from sarcasm to venom. "Your new husband's a ghost, can't even face me. Tell him his little financial games won't work. I'm not scared of some paper pusher." He hit send. The message was delivered, and read. In Kenji's office, a lieutenant showed him the screen. Kenji studied the words, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The paper-pushing phase was over. The ledger had been audited. The next payment would be extracted in person. The collection call arrived not as a threat, but as an invitation. 3 days after his taunting text, Mark received a message from an unknown number. It was a picture of the restaurant bill from La Belle Epoque, dated the day of the confrontation, with his signature clearly visible at the bottom. Beneath it, a single line of text. "A debt remains unsettled. Let us discuss terms. The Garden Bar, the Prince Park Tower, tomorrow at 5. No demand, no name." The sheer normality of it was the most unnerving part. It was a business meeting. Mark showed the message to his girlfriend, who shrugged. "Pay for his lunch and be done with it. He's just trying to scare you." But Mark, whose entire career was built on reading subtext in contracts, felt the ice in that formal tone. This was not about a lunch bill. He arrived at the hotel bar 5 minutes early, choosing a seat with his back to the wall. The space was all soft light and quiet jazz, wealthy tourists sipping cocktails. Kenji Tanaka entered at exactly 5 o'clock. He was alone, dressed in a charcoal suit that whispered rather than shouted expense. He moved with an economical grace, neither hurried nor hesitant, and took the seat opposite Mark without waiting for an invitation. He did not offer his hand. For a full minute, he said nothing, his dark eyes appraising Mark with a detached curiosity, as if studying a flawed piece of machinery. "You sent a text," Kenji finally said, his English precise, accentless. "You called me a paper pusher." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "This is correct. I push papers, contracts, deeds, loan agreements, the paper that built your apartment building, the paper that funded your firm's last round of venture capital, the paper that your girlfriend's father signed to keep his shipping company solvent last autumn." He named the company, a detail Mark knew was not public. "I am very good with paper. You are not. Your ledger is messy." Mark tried to summon his boardroom bluster. "Is this where you threaten me? Because I know my rights, I know people in the embassy." Kenji's expression did not change. It remained politely interested. "Threats are for amateurs. They create noise. I am here to clarify your balance. The insult to my wife carries a cost. The ongoing harassment, a higher cost. Your refusal to acknowledge this debt, highest of all. You have 3 days to tender a formal written apology to Alina. You will deliver it in person, at a location of her choosing, with a witness I appoint. You will then cease all contact, permanently. This is the first term." Mark barked a laugh, too loud for the quiet room. A few heads turned. "An apology, that's it? You drag me here to play therapist? Fine, I'm sorry her feelings got hurt. They're done." Kenji slowly rotated his whiskey glass on the coaster. "That was not the apology. That was a further debit to your account. You now also owe for my wasted time this evening." He placed a slim tablet on the table, tapped the screen, and turned it to face Mark. It displayed a series of financial statements, all from offshore entities Mark recognized intimately, his secret accounts, the ones he used to move bonuses away from his partners to hide money from his ex-wife. The balances were all zeroed out. Paper, Kenji said softly. The blood drained from Mark's face. This is impossible. Those are encrypted. They were, Kenji corrected. The encryption service you used is a subsidiary of a security firm my clan quietly majority owns. Your financial privacy was a product we sold you. We have revoked the license. He swiped the screen. A new document appeared, a loan agreement Mark had signed with a private lender 6 months prior, with a predatory interest rate he'd been struggling to service. The lender's signature was now followed by a fresh stamp of assignment. It had been sold. The new holder was a holding company with a name that meant nothing to Mark. Kenji pointed to it. This is now my paper. The payment is due in full in 72 hours. Failure will result in a public filing for bankruptcy in your home country. Your partners will be notified of your hidden accounts simultaneously. This was no longer about an insult. This was dismantlement. Mark's bravado crumbled into frantic calculation. What do you want? Money? I can get money. I do not want your money, Kenji said, standing. I want your compliance, the apology, the silence, or I will continue correcting your ledger line by line. He placed a plain white business card on the table. It bore only a phone number. You have 3 days. Use the time wisely. He walked away, leaving Mark staring at the evidence of his own financial evisceration. The next 48 hours were a descent into silent panic. Mark's attempts to access his hidden funds hit digital walls. His lawyer, when cautiously presented with the loan assignment, paled and advised immediate, unquestioning cooperation. This isn't a lawsuit, the lawyer whispered over secure line. This is a tectonic plate shifting. You are in the way. Move. Meanwhile, Elena, shielded from the mechanics of the retaliation, was dealing with a different consequence. The clan's protection was absolute, but it was also a gilded cage. A female member of the organization, an older woman named Hana who handled internal family matters, visited their home. She was courteous but firm. Elena's public humiliation was a clan embarrassment. There would be no further unsupervised public appearances until the matter was settled. Her movements, for her own safety, were to be discreetly monitored. The freedom she had fought for was suddenly constrained by the very power that had saved her. She confronted Kenji that night, her anger cutting through her fear. I left one controller for another. He absorbed her outburst without defensiveness. No, he said finally. You left a man who broke you for sport, for a family that will break the world to protect you. The geometry is different. The feeling, I understand, is similar. This will pass. He will pass. On the 3rd day, Mark broke. He called the number. He was instructed to come to the lobby of the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Museum at noon. He arrived, apology letter clutched in a sweaty hand, and was met not by Kenji, but by Hana, the same woman overseeing Elena's security. She looked him up and down with an expression of mild distaste, as if finding a stain on a clean floor. You will follow me. You will speak only when asked a direct question. You will look at the floor unless directed otherwise. She led him not into the galleries, but through a staff door, down a concrete corridor, and into a vast, empty restoration studio. Natural light flooded the space, illuminating floating dust motes. At the far end, Elena sat on a plain wooden stool. She was alone. She looked at him, her face calm, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. Hana positioned Mark 10 feet away and stepped back into the shadows. The silence stretched. Mark's prepared speech died in his throat. This was not the dramatic confrontation he'd imagined. It was a cold, clinical presentation. You have something to say, Elena stated. It wasn't a question. He fumbled the letter out, began reading a stilted, legalistic apology he'd drafted with his lawyer. He got 3 sentences in before she raised a hand, stopping him. That is an apology written by your attorney to mitigate liability. I asked for your apology. If you do not have one, we are finished. There was a steel in her voice he had never heard before, forged in the crucible of his past abuse and her current fearsome backing. Mark crumpled the paper. The real, rancid fear in his gut finally broke through. I'm sorry, he said, the words raw and stripped of pretense. I was cruel. I wanted to hurt you. I am afraid now. Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Your fear is appropriate. You should be afraid. You connected your well-being to my suffering. You made a very bad investment. She stood with some difficulty, and Hana was immediately at her side. The debt for the insult is settled, Elena said. The debt for my stolen company, for the years you cost me, that is a separate ledger, and it is not mine to collect." She turned and left. Mark stood alone in the bright, empty room, understanding with crystalline clarity that the apology was not the end. It was merely the completion of the first chapter. The real reckoning for all his past actions was still to come, and he had just confirmed his identity to the collector. Believing the worst was over was Mark's second critical mistake. The first was humiliating Elena. Kenji Tanaka did not operate in single, resolved incidents. He operated in cascading consequences. The forced apology had closed the personal ledger. The business ledger, the one Elena had alluded to, was now opened for audit. This retaliation would not target Mark's hidden wealth. It would target his oxygen, his reputation, his partnerships, his very identity as a successful man. It began with a whisper campaign, so subtle Mark initially dismissed it as bad luck. A potential joint venture in Singapore went cold after the lead investor received an anonymous, impeccably sourced dossier. It didn't accuse Mark of crimes. It simply laid out a timeline of his career, highlighting every instance of aggressive leverage, every partner he had squeezed out with legal technicalities, every employee who had signed a non-disclosure agreement after alleging bullying. The covering note read, "Due diligence on character risk. A man's treatment of his weakest former partner is the truest forecast of his future reliability." The language was pure finance. The message was pure Kenji. Next, Mark's biggest trophy client, a European luxury brand, abruptly requested to renegotiate their contract. When Mark flew to Paris to contain the damage, the CEO, a woman who had always praised his ruthlessness, met him with icy formality. "We've been made aware of certain contingent liabilities," she said. "Your personal legal entanglements in Asia present a brand risk we did not sign up for." She slid a copy of the loan assignment document across the table, the one Kenji now owned. "Financing your lifestyle through these channels suggests instability. We are restructuring our deal. Your firm's share is reduced by 40%. Mark's protests were met with a wall. The information had not come from a competitor. It had come from their own Japanese board member who had quietly consulted with local advisors on governance. The true "it gets worse" moment arrived via a formal, creamy envelope delivered to Mark's Tokyo apartment. It was an invitation to a gala fundraiser for a prestigious international arts foundation. The host committee listed a number of titans of industry, and there, among the names, was Kenji Tanaka, representing the Tanaka family office. It was a calculated, public flex. Kenji was not hiding in the shadows. He was inviting Mark to watch him operate in the light, in the very rooms Mark was desperately trying to remain part of. The attached handwritten note, in Kenji's precise script, read, "Your presence is requested. Settling all accounts requires a full understanding of the table." It was a command, not an invitation. Mark went, driven by a masochistic need to see the scale of the power arrayed against him. The event was a symphony of whispered wealth, and there was Kenji, at the center of a respectful circle of politicians and CEOs, not as a gangster, but as a philanthropist. Elena was beside him, radiant in a sleek dress that accommodated her pregnancy, speaking fluent French with a gallery owner. She looked not like a prisoner in a gilded cage, but like a queen consort. Their eyes met across the room. Elena's gaze held no gloating, only a distant, pitying finality. In that moment, Mark understood the full geometry of his loss. He hadn't just lost a woman he could control. He had elevated her onto a platform from which he looked like an insect. A week later, the separate ledger was presented. Mark was summoned to a nondescript office building in Shinjuku. The room contained a table, 2 chairs, and Hana. She pushed a file toward him. "This is the matter of Beaumont Designs," she said, using the name of Elena's old company. The file contained a forensic accounting of the startup Elena and her former friend Suyeon had built in Lyon. It charted the initial investment, Elena's design work, the intellectual property she developed, and the fraudulent maneuvering by Suyeon and Mark, who had been Suyeon's secret boyfriend at the time, to dilute Elena's shares and force her out after she became pregnant. It included bank transfers from Suyeon's company to Mark's personal account, labeled as consulting fees, dated days before he engineered their explosive breakup. "This is ancient history," Mark stammered. "The company failed after she left." Hana opened another file. It It showed the current corporate structure of Suyon's now thriving design firm, which had been acquired last year by a larger conglomerate. A highlighted line showed a silent equity stake held by a Panamanian shell company. That shell company, Hana said, is controlled by an investment trust that pays a quarterly advisory fee to the Tanaka family office. We now own a piece of everything you stole. The valuation of the stolen intellectual property at the time of your fraud, plus compounded interest at a market rate, has been calculated. She named a figure that was several times Mark's current net worth. This is the civil debt. You will sign this acknowledgement of debt. Mark refused. This was beyond extortion. It was retroactive justice. Hana merely nodded. Your choice. The criminal path is also available. She presented a second dossier, this one for Mark's eyes only. It contained photographs, times, dates, and financial records linking him to a tax evasion scheme involving fake invoices from a dummy corporation, a side project he'd thought was invisible. The evidence was wrapped in a bow, ready for the Tokyo Public Prosecutor's Office. The choice was no longer between wealth and poverty. It was between poverty and prison, with the debt still waiting for him upon release. Broken, Mark signed the acknowledgement of debt. He expected to be ruined immediately. Instead, a payment plan was established, a monstrous percentage of his annual income in perpetuity. Kenji was not seizing his assets. He was making Mark a tenant farmer on his own ruined estate, forcing him to labor to repay the life he had stolen. The humiliation was exquisitely complete. Mark returned to his diminished life, a shell watching as his income was systematically siphoned away each quarter, a permanent, walking monument to his own failure. But Kenji had underestimated one thing, the desperate, cornered ego of a broken bully. Mark's shame curdled into a venomous obsession. He began drinking heavily. He lost his remaining clients. The girlfriend left. In his drunken, paranoid state, a new narrative formed. Elena was the source of all this. She had manipulated this Yakuza psychopath to destroy him. If she were gone, the debt would vanish. The obsession focused on her pregnancy, the ultimate symbol of her new life, her happiness with another man. In the twisted algebra of his mind, eliminating that future became the only way to cancel his debt. He began watching their residence, a heavily secured compound in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. He noted routines, security patrols. He saw Elena, in her final month of pregnancy, taking short, guarded walks in the private garden with Hana. The protection was obvious, but Mark was now beyond rational cost-benefit analysis. He acquired a stolen handgun from the fetid underbelly of Roppongi, a world Kenji controlled but whose street-level chaos he could still slip into. The plan was simple, desperate, and suicidal. Wait for a moment, any moment, and fire from a distance. It wasn't about escape. It was about striking the final blow. The moment came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Elena, feeling stifled, insisted on a walk in a nearby public park that was deemed secure enough for a quick outing. The security detail was tight, Hana by her side, a male operative 10 paces ahead, another 10 behind. Mark, shrouded in a raincoat and hood, watched from a stand of trees 50 yards away, the gun heavy and alien in his hand. He raised it, his hands shaking, the rain blurring his vision. He centered the sight on Elena's back. He took a breath, finger tightening on the trigger. He never saw the man who had been posing as a homeless man asleep on a bench behind him. He only felt the vice-like grip on his wrist, the brutal twist, the crack of bone, and the gun falling silently into the damp grass before he could make a sound. A voice, calm and close to his ear, whispered, "The ledger is now closed in full." Then everything went black. Mark regained consciousness in a room that was conspicuously, deliberately ordinary. It was a small, clean office in what looked like a mid-tier business hotel. His wrist was professionally splintered and bandaged. A man in a dark suit sat across from him, not Kenji, but someone with the same calm detachment. On the table between them lay the stolen handgun, sealed in a clear evidence bag, and a digital recorder. "You are awake," the man said. "Good. We will now record your confession to the attempted murder of Elena Tanaka and your statement regarding the illegal procurement of this firearm. You will include all details. When we are satisfied, you will be handed over to the Metropolitan Police." This was not a hidden dungeon. It was a processing center. Kenji was following the paper trail to its absolute logical conclusion. The humiliation of a public arrest, a public trial, a public lifetime in a Japanese prison. Mark, his spirit broken, confessed to everything in a monotone. He was given water, allowed to use the bathroom under guard, and treated with a clinical courtesy that was more dehumanizing than any brutality. 2 hours after his confession was recorded, the police arrived. The handover was seamless. The arresting officers nodded respectfully to Kenji's lieutenant. The paperwork was already in order. Mark was led away in handcuffs, past hotel staff who averted their eyes, into the mundane brightness of a Tokyo afternoon. Elena was informed of the arrest at home. She felt no triumph, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a tremble in her hands that wouldn't stop. The baby kicked, a fierce reminder of life asserting itself against the backdrop of death. Kenji found her in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply stood beside her, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling fear. "It is finished," he said, not a question, a declaration. He will never see outside a prison wall. His family has been notified. There will be no embassy intervention. The debt is cancelled. But for Elena, a new fear had been born. The threat wasn't just to her, but to her unborn child. The gilded cage of protection now felt like a necessary fortress. She looked at Kenji, really looked at him, seeing not just her husband, but the Shate, the man who commanded a network that could make people disappear into the legal system as easily as into the earth. "At what cost?" she whispered. "What does this make me? What does it make us?" Kenji turned her to face him. "It makes you safe. It makes our daughter safe. The cost was his to pay, not yours. Do not carry his debt." The legal machinery ground forward with unusual speed. Mark's confession, coupled with the irrefutable physical evidence and testimony from the undercover operative who disarmed him, made for an open and shut case. The financial crimes, the tax evasion scheme Kenji's people had uncovered, were added to the docket. The story, a sordid tale of a jealous ex attempting to murder his pregnant successor, leaked to the press. Mark's photo was in the tabloids, his reputation obliterated. At his arraignment, he pleaded guilty, accepting a sentence of 25 years with no possibility of parole. He was a ghost, erased from the world of light and money he had coveted. With the immediate threat vaporized, the dynamics within the Tanaka household began to subtly shift. The restrictive security protocols remained, but the reason changed. It was no longer just about threat response. It became about stability for the new baby. Hana, the stern overseer, transitioned into a fierce, doting honorary aunt. Elena, realizing the power she wielded within this constrained sphere, began to use it. She reviewed the acknowledgement of debt Mark had signed for Beaumont Designs. Instead of having the payments come to the clan's coffers, she directed Kenji to have them routed to a newly established foundation in her name, one that provided legal aid and housing for single mothers facing harassment and discrimination in Japan. It was her first independent act of power, using the resources of her shadow world to address the very real-world injustice she had suffered. Kenji authorized it without comment, a faint sign of approval at the corner of his mouth. The final surprising detail emerged 3 months after the birth of their daughter, Eiko. Kenji arrived home with a document, not a threat but a gift. He had quietly acquired the remaining shares of Suyon's design firm, the company built on Elena's stolen work. He placed the share certificates in Elena's hands. "It is yours," he said. "Do with it as you wish. Dismantle it, run it, sell it. The choice is yours alone." It was the complete restoration of what was taken, delivered not as a romantic gesture, but as a settled account. Elena chose to sell. The proceeds, enormous, were folded into her foundation. The past was not just avenged, it was monetized and repurposed. The balance they achieved was not a fairy tale ending. It was a tense, conscious equilibrium. Elena's life was one of immense privilege and unspoken boundaries. She loved Kenji, and he cherished her and the children with a fierce, quiet devotion that was utterly genuine. But she was never unaware of the source of their security. She had traded the chaotic cruelty of a selfish man for the structured, lethal protection of a dangerous one. The geometry, as Kenji had said, was different. The power imbalance was still there, but now she had learned to navigate it, to carve out pockets of autonomy within it. On the first anniversary of the restaurant incident, Kenji took Elena back to La Belle Epoque. He booked the entire private dining room. There was no confrontation, no drama. They ate a quiet meal. At the end, the elderly maitre d', who remembered everything, was summoned. Kenji thanked him for his excellent service that difficult day a year before and handed him an envelope containing a tip so large it was clearly a pension contribution. It was a message etched in generosity and absolute control. This place, this memory was now owned. The ledger was not just closed, it had been archived. As they stepped out into the Tokyo night, Elena tucked her hand into the crook of Kenji's arm. She was safe. Her children were safe. The man who had sought to break her was gone, neutralized not by a dramatic street fight, but by the cold, efficient systems of money, law, and social power that were the true weapons of the modern Yakuza. The revenge fantasy was complete, but the reality was more complex, more ambiguous, and ultimately more enduring. The story promises a violent comeuppance, but the real power lies in the quiet, permanent rearrangement of a life. So what is the real story here? It's not a simple tale of good versus evil, or even of revenge. It's a case study in the migration of power. The fantasy we crave is of a dramatic, violent reckoning, a Yakuza enforcer breaking bones in a dark alley. The reality, as seen in modern Japan, is often quieter, more bureaucratic, and infinitely more suffocating. Real power today doesn't always shout. It repossesses, it litigates, it socially isolates, and it leverages the system itself as its weapon. Mark wasn't destroyed by a knife, but by a ledger. His freedom wasn't taken by a thug, but by a prosecutor holding a file prepared by a ghost. This narrative taps into a deep, almost primal psychological need, the desire for a correcting force. When we feel powerless, when we see injustice go unpunished, we imagine a hidden mechanism that will restore balance. The appeal of this story lies in that promise that somewhere there is an accounting, and every cruelty will be met with a proportionate consequence. It's a fantasy of moral physics in a world that often seems morally weightless. But the resolution leaves us with uneasy questions. Did Elena truly win? She gained security, love, and restitution, but at the cost of living within a powerful, insular world with its own strict rules. She traded one form of control for another, albeit one that cherished and protected her. Is that freedom, or is it a more luxurious captivity? The story satisfies our thirst for justice, but it complicates our definition of a happy ending. The Yakuza, with their recorded low levels of violence towards civilians, proved to be the perfect, paradoxical vehicle for this. They represent a feared, mythical power, yet their modern methods are eerily familiar: financial pressure, reputational destruction, legal manipulation. They are the shadow version of our own corporate and social systems. In the end, Mark was defeated not by a monster from the underworld, but by a more efficient, more ruthless version of the very game he thought he was playing. This story reminds us that the greatest power lies not in the ability to inflict pain, but in the ability to structure reality, to define the rules, to control the ledger, to own the narrative. Elena moved from being a character in Mark's cruel story to the co-author of her own, within a narrative framework built by Kenji. That is the ultimate power reversal. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the invisible architectures of power in your own life, then share it with someone who needs to see it. Drop a comment below, tell us what you think true justice looks like, or if the price Elena paid was worth the safety she gained. Your perspective is part of this conversation. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We weave these narratives to explore the hidden corners of human nature, and we are so glad you're here with us. Until the next story, take care.